My friends, I want to begin today with a truth that reaches deep into every human heart. A truth that speaks to the broken, the weary, and the waiting. God is reuniting you with what was lost. There are seasons in life where it feels as if everything precious has slipped through our fingers. Dreams that once burned bright now flicker faintly in the distance. Relationships that shattered under the weight of misunderstanding. Opportunities that seem forever gone. And in those moments we wonder, Lord, is there still a plan for me? But I tell you today with every ounce of conviction in my soul, yes, there is a plan. God's plan does not crumble under the weight of our losses. His promises are not buried beneath our pain. You may feel forgotten, but heaven still remembers your name. When you are chosen by God, loss is never the end of your story. It is only a chapter that prepares you for restoration. When God allows the separation, some of you are walking through a season of separation right now. You've lost friendships you thought would last forever. You've watched doors close that once felt like divine appointments. You've seen things you loved slip away and your heart aches. But hear me, when God allows something or someone to leave your life, it's not always rejection. Sometimes it's redirection. There was a man in Scripture who knew this feeling well, Job. He was a righteous man, yet he lost everything: his health, his wealth, his family. But the Bible says something so powerful. The Lord blessed the latter part of Job's life more than the former. That means that loss does not define you. Restoration does. God sometimes allows the breaking so that He can rebuild you stronger, deeper, and more dependent on Him than ever before. You see, God is not cruel. He is careful. He prunes what is unnecessary so that your life can bear greater fruit. You may not understand it now, but one day you'll look back and say, it had to happen this way. Because if it hadn't, you would never have discovered the depth of God's faithfulness. The pain of delay is not the denial of destiny. There's something about waiting that tests our faith like nothing else. When God seems silent, when prayers go unanswered, when the road ahead feels unclear, that's where many lose heart. But I want to tell you today, delay does not mean denial. Sometimes God hides what belongs to you for a season, not to punish you, but to prepare you. He is aligning hearts, circumstances, and timing in a way that only He can. Think of Joseph. He had dreams of greatness, of being used by God in powerful ways. Yet before the dream came to pass, he was betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and imprisoned unjustly. For years, he lived in the shadow of disappointment. But the day came when Pharaoh called him out of the dungeon, and in one divine moment, everything changed. The same brothers who betrayed him bowed before him, just as God had shown in the dream. My friend, when God says He will restore, He means it. And when He restores, He does it in a way that silences your doubts and magnifies His glory. The years you thought were wasted, He's been using them to strengthen your spirit. The tears you thought were forgotten, He's been collecting every one. The waiting that felt unbearable, He's been writing your testimony. He restores what was lost and makes it better. When God reunites you with what was lost, it will not return to you in the same broken condition. He restores with increase. He multiplies what was taken. If you lost peace, He brings peace that surpasses understanding. If you lost love, He gives you love that heals instead of hurts. If you lost opportunities, He opens doors no man can shut. If you lost faith, He ignites a fire that cannot be quenched. There is nothing, absolutely nothing, beyond His power to restore. Do you remember when Jesus met Mary and Martha after their brother Lazarus died? They said, Lord, if You had been here, our brother would not have died. But Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Then He called out, Lazarus, come forth. And what was dead came alive again. Some of you have buried your hope like Lazarus in the tomb. You've said, it's too late, it's over. But hear the voice of the Savior calling today, come forth. He's not done with your story. What you thought was final is only the beginning of a greater resurrection. The chosen ones walk through fire, but not alone. Being chosen by God does not mean you'll never face hardship. In fact, it often means you'll face more. But the difference is this: you are never alone in the fire. The enemy tries to use loss to convince you that God has abandoned you. But what if I told you that the fire you're walking through is the very proof that you are chosen? Think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were thrown into the fiery furnace for refusing to bow to false gods. The flames were so intense that even the guards who threw them in were consumed. Yet when the king looked inside, he saw not 3 men, but 4, and the 4th looked like the Son of God. The fire did not destroy them, it set them free. That's what God is doing in your life. The trial that was meant to break you is refining you. The loss that was meant to crush you is teaching you to lean on Him like never before. The pain that was meant to silence you is becoming the platform for your praise. You are not forgotten, you are being forged. He is reuniting you. But His way, not yours. When God restores, He doesn't always do it in the way we expect. Sometimes He brings back what was lost, but other times He gives something new that fulfills the same place in your heart, only better. We often want God to bring things back exactly as they were, but He says, I'm not taking you backward, I'm taking you higher. Maybe you lost a friend, a job, a relationship, or even a season of life that you loved. And you've been praying, Lord, bring it back just like it was. But what if God's plan is not to take you back, but to move you forward into something that carries the same blessing without the same pain? Sometimes the reunion isn't about people returning. It's about purpose returning. It's about joy returning. It's about peace returning. It's about you finding yourself again in the presence of God. That's the kind of restoration that changes everything. The moment of the divine reunion, there will come a moment, maybe soon, when everything begins to align. You'll start to see how God was working behind the scenes all along. The people who left will make sense. The delays will make sense. The tears will make sense. And you'll realize He never took anything from me that He didn't plan to restore. Some of you are about to walk into a season of divine reunion, not just with people or opportunities, but with your calling. You are being reconnected to the destiny God designed for you before you were even born. The enemy thought he could steal your joy, your peace, your hope, but he underestimated the power of a child chosen by God. You are not defined by what you lost. You are defined by what you carry. And what you carry cannot be destroyed. The Spirit of the living God is breathing life into every dead place. He is restoring broken families. He is healing wounded hearts. He is rekindling forgotten dreams. He is bringing prodigals home. He is turning sorrow into dancing. Yes, chosen one. He is reuniting you with what was lost. Your faith unlocks restoration. God always works through faith. When you believe that He can restore, you give Him permission to move in ways you cannot imagine. Faith is not pretending everything is fine. Faith is saying, even when I don't see it, I trust that He's working. When the Israelites stood before the Red Sea, they had no idea how God would make a way. Behind them was Pharaoh's army, and before them was an ocean. But Moses lifted his staff in faith, and the waters parted. When you lift your faith, even when you don't see how, God makes a way where there seems to be no way. He parts the waters. He breaks the chains. He restores what was taken. Heaven is your ultimate reunion one day. Every believer will experience the greatest reunion of all. When we stand before God and see His glory face to face, every tear will be wiped away. Every loss will be redeemed. Every question will find its answer. In that moment, we will understand fully what we could only see in part on earth, that God was never late, never unjust, never absent. He was guiding us home all along. And for those who walk with Him now, the chosen ones who keep faith even through the fire, He promises not only eternal reunion in heaven, but glimpses of restoration here on earth. A final word to the weary. I know some of you are tired. You've been waiting for restoration for so long. You've cried until there were no tears left. You've prayed until your words ran dry. But I want to remind you, the God who began a good work in you will complete it. He doesn't start something and walk away. The very thing you think is over is the soil in which your miracle is growing. When Joseph was in the pit, he couldn't see the palace. When David was hiding in caves, he couldn't see the throne. When Ruth was gleaning in the fields, she couldn't see the redemption that was coming. But every moment of loss was a step toward restoration. And so it is with you. God is weaving your story in ways that you cannot see. The pieces that feel scattered are coming together. The doors that closed are leading to better ones. The people who left made room for those who are meant to stay. You are chosen. You are not forgotten. You are not forsaken. Your loss is not the end. It's the prelude to a divine reunion. So lift your head, wipe your tears, stand firm in faith, because the same God who raised Lazarus from the dead, who restored Job's fortune, who reunited Joseph with his family, is about to restore you. He is reuniting you with peace, with purpose, with people, with everything that the enemy tried to destroy. This is not the end of your story. This is the beginning of your comeback. God has chosen you for restoration, and no power in hell can stop what heaven has ordained. So hold on, chosen one, because God is reuniting you with what was lost. There are moments in life when God allows separation, and it feels as if the very foundation beneath you has been shaken. You look around and realize that people you trusted have walked away, doors you prayed for have closed, and the familiar comfort of what once was has faded into silence. It is in those moments that confusion floods the heart, and you begin to wonder if you've somehow missed God's plan. But separation is not always a sign of rejection. Often it is the first movement in the symphony of divine preparation. God allows separation because he knows that certain attachments, certain environments, and certain versions of you cannot carry the weight of what he is preparing to give. He is not punishing you, he is positioning you. When God calls you chosen, he begins to refine your path, cutting away what cannot go where he's taking you. What feels like loss is sometimes protection in disguise, and what seems like abandonment is actually the hand of a loving Father steering you toward destiny. Think of Abraham, called by God to leave his home, his family, his comfort zone, and go to a place that God would show him. He had to separate from the familiar before he could step into the promise. The call of God always begins with a step away before it becomes a step forward. Abraham could not see where he was going, but he trusted the one who called him. That is what separation requires: trust. You cannot see the full picture, but you must trust that God's hand is guiding even the painful goodbyes and the closed doors. When God separates you, he is not removing value from your life. He is creating space for new value to enter. There are seasons where you will feel stripped, as if everything that gave your life meaning is being removed piece by piece. The friendships that once sustained you, the plans you once clung to, even the dreams that once defined you, all seem to fall away. But in that emptiness, God is clearing the clutter from your heart so he can fill it with something far greater than you imagined. He is preparing you not just to receive blessing, but to sustain it. Many people ask God for promotion, for favor, for opportunity, but they forget that preparation often begins with separation. Before God can trust you with the next level, he must remove everything that can't survive the new altitude. When Joseph was thrown into the pit by his brothers, he could have seen it as betrayal and abandonment. In truth, it was the first step toward his destiny. Had his brothers not sold him into slavery, he would never have reached Egypt. Had he never reached Egypt, he would never have entered Pharaoh's palace. What looked like the enemy's victory was actually God's preparation. The separation from his family was painful, but it was necessary for him to become the man who would one day save that very family from famine. God will sometimes separate you from what you love most to bring you into what you're called to do. You may not realize it, but God often uses loss to reveal loyalty. When everything is stripped away and you have nothing left to lean on but him, that is when faith becomes real. Many people know God through blessings, but the chosen ones know him through brokenness. They have seen his face in the dark. They have felt his presence when everyone else was gone. That kind of faith cannot be learned through comfort. It is only formed through separation. The wilderness, the silence, the seasons of waiting, they are all part of the divine curriculum that builds unshakable trust. There's a story in the Gospels about Jesus feeding the 5,000. Before he multiplied the bread, he first took it, blessed it, broke it, and then gave it. Notice that sequence. Before something can be given for God's purpose, it must be broken. And before it can be broken, it must be separated from the rest. God takes you aside, away from the noise, away from the crowd, away from the distractions, not to isolate you, but to prepare you for multiplication. He blesses you, then he breaks you, and only then does he release you to fulfill your purpose. Separation is the part where he takes you. It is a divine isolation that precedes transformation. Some of you have been asking why God removed certain people from your life. You thought they were part of your forever. but they were only meant for your formation. Not everyone can walk with you to the mountaintop. Some are only assigned to your valley. And if you try to hold on to what God is trying to remove, you'll delay your destiny. God knows who and what belongs in your next season. He sees what you cannot see. You may see the pain of separation, but He sees the purpose beyond it. Every removal is a revelation. Every ending has divine intention written into it. When you are chosen, you cannot remain in the same place spiritually or emotionally. God stirs your spirit when you begin to settle. He disturbs your comfort so that you will pursue His calling. Like the eagle that stirs its nest to teach its young to fly, God shakes up your environment to awaken your potential. The discomfort you feel is not a sign that God has left you. It's a sign that He's pushing you into greater things. The nest was safe, but it was never meant to be permanent. You cannot soar while you cling to what was. You have to release the familiar to receive the promised. In those moments of divine separation, you will experience loneliness, doubt, and the temptation to go back. But remember, God never calls you backward. The path of faith always leads forward. The Israelites longed to return to Egypt because it was familiar, even though it was bondage. Freedom felt uncertain, but captivity felt comfortable. That's the danger of not understanding separation. You begin to mistake captivity for comfort. God's desire is to move you from the familiar into the fruitful, but that journey always begins with leaving something behind. Separation is painful because it touches the heart of our identity. We attach meaning to people, places, and seasons, and when God removes them, it feels like part of us is being taken too. But what He's really doing is revealing that your identity is not in what you lost, but in who He is. When you no longer have what defined you, you discover the one who sustains you. That is the moment you begin to understand that God Himself is enough. And when you reach that place, when your peace no longer depends on what stays or what leaves, that is when you are ready for restoration. God allows separation to reveal strength. Like gold refined in fire, you come out purer and more radiant than before. You begin to walk with new clarity, new humility, and new dependence. You stop chasing what left and start trusting what's coming. Every tear you cried in the season of loss becomes the seed of faith that will bloom in the season of restoration. Every closed door was God's way of rewriting you to the one that leads to purpose. Every heartbreak was a hammer shaping you into someone unshakable. If you look closely at your life, you'll see a pattern. Every major blessing was preceded by a season of breaking. Every divine connection came after a painful disconnection. Every victory was born from a valley. That's not coincidence. That's the rhythm of redemption. God separates before He elevates. He prunes before He prospers. He empties before He fills. And though separation hurts, there's beauty in it. Because in that sacred space of loss, you find intimacy with God that comfort could never offer. You begin to hear His whisper again. You begin to remember that His presence is only constant in a world that keeps changing. You begin to realize that everything taken was temporal, but everything promised is eternal. When you finally understand that, you stop fighting separation and start flowing with it. You begin to thank God for what left, knowing that what remains is holy. You start to walk lighter, freer, with eyes fixed on the one who holds your future. You stop chasing closure and start embracing calling. God allows separation not to destroy you, but to develop you. He is making room for what He has already prepared, and when the time is right, He will reunite you with what was lost. Only now you'll be ready to receive it. There are times in life when it seems that everything you have prayed for is delayed. When heaven feels silent and your faith feels fragile, you've asked God for direction, for answers, for breakthrough, and yet the doors remain closed, the opportunities seem distant, and the waiting feels endless. In those moments, it's easy to wonder if God has forgotten you, if perhaps your prayers were lost in the noise of life. But delay is not denial. God's silence is not His absence, and His timing is never off. Every moment you are waiting, He is working. Every pause you feel is divine preparation. What looks like a delay to you is often God aligning the details in ways your eyes cannot yet see. The chosen ones learn that the space between promise and fulfillment is holy ground. It's in that in-between space that faith is refined, character is shaped, and purpose begins to mature. God never wastes waiting seasons. They are the unseen workshops of destiny where He molds your spirit to match the size of your calling. If he gave you the blessing too soon, you might mishandle it. If he opened the door before you were ready, you might step through it with pride instead of humility. Delay is God's mercy disguised as frustration. He loves you too much to release what you're not ready to carry. Think about Joseph again, a man whose life illustrates this truth perfectly. As a young boy, he received dreams from God that one day he would be in a position of authority. But instead of walking straight into that destiny, he was betrayed, sold, enslaved, and imprisoned. 13 years passed before those dreams became reality. 13 years of silence, 13 years of wondering if God still remembered the promise. Yet every delay had purpose. The pit prepared him for humility. The prison prepared him for leadership. The delay prepared him for destiny. When the moment finally came for Pharaoh to call him forth, Joseph was not the same man he had been when the dream was first given. The delay had transformed him. God's timing is not measured by our impatience. What feels late to us is right on time in the kingdom. The seasons of waiting are the seasons where faith is tested and trust is strengthened. The truth is, God doesn't just want to give you something. He wants to make you someone. He wants to build a foundation in your heart that can hold the weight of his blessings. If your roots don't go deep in trust, your fruit won't last in success. That's why sometimes he holds you back. Not to break your spirit, but to anchor it. The deeper the foundation, the taller the building can rise. We often measure God's faithfulness by how quickly he answers our prayers, but he measures it by how we endure when he doesn't. Waiting reveals what you really believe. Do you trust his heart when you can't trace his hand? Can you worship while you wait? Can you still lift your hands when nothing seems to move? That's where true faith is born. In the stillness, in the silence, in the space where nothing seems to be happening, yet everything is. Delay also protects you. Sometimes God withholds something because he knows it would harm you if it came too soon. The same sun that melts wax hardens clay. The difference isn't in the sun, it's in what it shines on. God's blessings are the same way. They can shape you or they can destroy you, depending on the condition of your heart. So, in mercy, he waits until you're ready. He matures your character. He heals the places where pride, fear, or insecurity might sabotage the very thing you're praying for. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before leading the Israelites out of Egypt. David was anointed king long before he wore the crown. Even Jesus waited 30 years before beginning his public ministry. Every chosen vessel in Scripture endured delay because destiny requires development. If the Son of God himself waited, then surely we can endure our own seasons of waiting with faith. The waiting doesn't mean God has forgotten. It means he is forming something eternal inside you. There are lessons in the waiting that cannot be learned in the blessing. In waiting, you learn patience. In silence, you learn to listen. In disappointment, you learn dependency. God uses these moments to strip away every false source of strength until you discover that he alone is enough. The delay becomes sacred because it shifts your focus from what you want to who he is. And once you understand that you no longer need to chase outcomes, you begin to rest in his sovereignty. Sometimes God delays not because you're not ready, but because others involved in your destiny aren't ready yet. He's arranging circumstances, shaping hearts, moving pieces that you don't even know exist. It's like a tapestry woven from the back. From your side, all you see are tangled threads and knots. But from his side, it's forming a masterpiece. When he finally turns it around, you realize that every moment of confusion was actually divine coordination. The delay wasn't wasted time, it was woven time. When you pray and don't see results, remember that faith doesn't operate by sight. A seed buried in soil looks invisible for a season, but beneath the ground, roots are growing. The delay between planting and harvest doesn't mean the seed is dead. It means it's developing. Your prayers work the same way. Just because you can't see the fruit yet doesn't mean God isn't nurturing it. In due time, in his time, the harvest will come. The same God who controls the sun, moon, and stars also controls your seasons. And he never moves too early or too late. There's something beautiful about divine timing. When it arrives, it carries peace. When it's forced, it carries chaos. You can tell the difference because what comes in God's time doesn't demand you to compromise. It doesn't exhaust your spirit. It fits. It aligns. It flows. Divine timing feels like breathing again after holding your breath for years. And when that moment comes, you will understand why it took so long. You will realize that the delay didn't break you. It built you. It gave you perspective. It taught you to value what you once took for granted. You see, when God finally fulfills his promise, it's never just about the result. It's about the revelation of who he is. You will see that his plan was never delayed. It was simply unfolding. His timing will reveal his faithfulness. You'll look back at all the nights you cried, all the prayers you whispered in the dark, and you'll realize that none of it was wasted. Each second of waiting was a step closer to the miracle. Delay also tests humility. It reminds you that you're not in control. And that's not punishment, that's freedom. Because once you surrender the need to control, you make room for peace. You begin to rest in the truth that God's hands are more capable than yours. You stop striving and start trusting. And in that trust, something shifts inside you. You no longer live in fear of missing out or falling behind. You know that the same God who created time controls it. He's not late, he's deliberate. Every delay has divine design. When the time finally comes, when the waiting ends, it will make sense. The job that didn't work out, the relationship that didn't last, the opportunity that slipped through your fingers, they were all part of the delay that led you to the right door. The detours will look like destiny in hindsight. What once felt like rejection will be revealed as redirection. The tears will make sense. The silence will make sense. The delay was never denial. It was God preparing you for a reunion far greater than you imagined. So if you find yourself waiting right now, remember that waiting is not wasting. The promise still stands. The blessing is still alive. Heaven's clock runs perfectly. And when the appointed moment arrives, it will happen suddenly. The breakthrough you prayed for, the restoration you believed for, the answer you hoped for, it will come exactly when it's supposed to. And when it does, you will realize that the delay was the very thing that made the fulfillment so beautiful. Because in the waiting, you became ready to receive it. When God restores something, he never returns it in the same condition it was lost. Restoration in God's hands is never simple repair, it is divine renewal. When he gives back what you thought was gone forever, it comes back fuller, stronger, purer, and better. The world can only replace, but God recreates. The human heart often prays for what was, while God prepares for what will be. That is why the chosen must learn that loss is not the conclusion, but the beginning of transformation. When you walk through loss, it can feel as though everything valuable has been stripped away, but in God's plan, what is taken is often what must be removed to make room for what's greater. His restoration never duplicates, it multiplies. When Job lost everything, he sat among ashes, questioning what had happened, his heart breaking under the weight of grief. Yet, in his faithfulness, even when he didn't understand, he continued to honor God. And when the storm was over, the scripture says that God restored to Job double what he had before. His story wasn't about what he lost. It was about what God gave back after loss. That is how divine restoration works. It exceeds human logic and expectation. It doesn't merely bring back what was stolen. It brings back abundance in place of emptiness. God's way of restoring is to demonstrate that nothing surrendered in faith is ever truly gone. It is only being refined for return. Every broken area in your life is a canvas for God's glory. Every scar tells a story that, when touched by his hand, becomes a testimony. When God restores your peace, it's not fragile anymore. It's a peace that stands firm, even in chaos, because you've learned where peace truly comes from. When he restores love, it's not built on shallow emotions, but on depth, compassion, and forgiveness. When he restores joy, it's no longer circumstantial, it's rooted in his presence. Restoration with God always upgrades what was broken. You don't just get back, you get better. There are people who pray for restoration, but resist the process that brings it. Restoration often begins with breaking. Before God rebuilds, he clears away what no longer belongs. You might feel that things are being taken from you, but he is simply making space. He cannot fill a vessel that is already full. Sometimes he must empty your hands so he can fill them with something new. The pain you feel is not a sign of destruction, but of divine construction. You may be standing in ruins, but heaven sees the blueprint. The process hurts, but it's holy. The widow in 2 Kings who cried out to Elisha had nothing left but a small jar of oil. Her husband was gone, her debts were great, and her hope was slipping. But God used that very jar, that little remnant of what remained, to restore her. When she poured the oil in faith, God multiplied it until every vessel was filled. What she thought was insignificant became the seed of her miracle. That is what God does with the remnants of your life. He takes what's left, breathes upon it, and turns it into overflow. He never needs much to create more. He just needs your surrender. Restoration also happens inside you before it happens around you. God begins by restoring your faith, your confidence, your courage. He revives your ability to believe again. The enemy attacks the heart and mind first, because if he can make you doubt, he can make you settle. But when you allow God to touch the hidden wounds, when you give him the broken pieces without reservation, he begins to piece you back together. And what emerges is someone wiser, stronger, and freer than before. Restoration is not just about regaining possessions or relationships, it's about recovering your identity in him. Sometimes God restores by returning what was lost, other times he restores by replacing it with something entirely new. You may be praying for an old door to open again, but God is building a new one. You may be looking for the same opportunity, but God is preparing a greater one that you could not have imagined. Restoration doesn't mean repetition, it means redemption. He redeems the time, the pain, the mistakes, and the seasons that seemed wasted. He takes what the enemy meant for harm and turns it for good. Every disappointment is repurposed into destiny. Every setback becomes setup. Every loss becomes leverage for the next level of blessing. When the prodigal son returned home after wasting his inheritance, he expected punishment, but his father ran to him with open arms. The father didn't just accept him back, he restored him to full sonship. He put a robe on him, a ring on his finger, shoes on his feet, and prepared a feast in his honor. That is the nature of divine restoration. It doesn't just forgive, it reinstates. It covers shame with grace. It replaces guilt with joy. It redefines you not by your mistakes, but by his mercy. When God restores, he doesn't bring you back to where you were. He lifts you higher than you've ever been. There are seasons when you feel as though the enemy has stolen too much, your energy, your relationships, your confidence, your purpose. But Scripture says that when the thief is caught, he must repay sevenfold. God is a God of recompense. He keeps record of every injustice, every tear, every loss. And when the time of restoration comes, it will exceed every expectation. You will find yourself saying, I never thought it could be this good again. Because God's restoration doesn't just settle the score, it multiplies the blessing. Restoration is also about perspective. Sometimes what was lost was never meant to stay. And when God restores, he doesn't always return what was, but he restores your heart so that you no longer mourn what's gone. He heals the longing, the regret, the bitterness. He gives you freedom from the weight of the past. You may never get back what you lost, but you will gain something far better, peace. Peace that frees you to live, to love, to hope again. That's restoration. When you've been broken and healed by God, you see everything differently. You stop chasing after what you think you need because you realize that everything you need flows from him. You start recognizing that what was lost was never your foundation. He was. You understand that true restoration is not found in things, but in presence. It's not in getting back, but in coming back, back to the heart of God, back to trust, back to surrender. That's where restoration truly begins. The chosen ones often endure deeper loss because they are destined for greater restoration. The enemy doesn't attack empty lives. He attacks those with purpose. But what he cannot destroy, God restores. Every season of loss is secretly pregnant with increase. Every dry place is a setup for rain. You may be in a wilderness now, but God has already planned the rivers that will flow through it. You may be walking through ashes, but there is beauty on the other side. The God who began a good work in you has not abandoned the construction site. When restoration arrives, it won't look like a return, it will look like a resurrection. The parts of your life that seem dead will breathe again. Dreams will come alive, opportunities will reappear, hearts will heal. What was broken will no longer remind you of pain, but of power. You will carry the marks of what you endured, but they will no longer be wounds, they will be testimonies. That's how God restores, not by erasing your past, but by transforming it into proof of his faithfulness. God's restoration is not partial. He doesn't stop halfway. He finishes what he starts The same hand that allowed the breaking is the one that brings the blessing. And when he restores all. The laughter returns, the joy returns, the strength returns. You become a living witness that nothing surrendered to God is ever truly lost. Everything that passes through his hands comes back holy, healed, and multiplied. Those who are chosen by God often find themselves walking through fires that others never face. It's not because God loves them less, but because he is preparing them for more. The fire is not a punishment, it's a process. It is the furnace where faith is purified, character is forged, and weakness is turned into strength. When God chooses you, he also chooses to refine you. And refinement never happens in comfort. It happens in the heat of adversity, in the tension of trials, in the pressure of pain. The chosen ones are set apart, not because their journey is easier, but because it is divinely designed to produce something eternal within them. The fire that surrounds them is not meant to destroy them, but to define them. Every great man or woman of faith has walked through fire. It's a common thread that runs through every story of those who have carried God's purpose. Look at the three Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They refused to bow to the idol set up by the king, and their conviction landed them in a fiery furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. The flames were real, the danger was real, but so was their faith. And when they were thrown in, the king saw not 3 men, but 4 walking freely in the fire, and the 4th looked like the Son of God. That moment wasn't just about their survival, it was about revelation. The fire revealed a presence that could only be seen in the heat. Sometimes you will never know that God is walking with you until the flames surround you. There are seasons when you cry out for God to take the fire away, but instead of removing it, he steps into it with you, because what you gain in his presence inside the fire is far greater than what you would gain by avoiding it. The chosen are refined because they carry something holy, and holiness is costly. You cannot carry the weight of glory without walking through the weight of testing. The fire exposes everything false, everything shallow, everything dependent on circumstance. It burns away pride, fear, and self-reliance until all that remains is pure trust in God. When gold is refined, it is not destroyed by heat, it is perfected by it. The refiner knows exactly how long to keep it in the fire. He watches it closely, never leaving it unattended. He doesn't remove it too soon because it would still contain impurities. He doesn't leave it too long because it would be damaged. He waits until he can see his reflection clearly in the gold, and then he knows the process is complete. That is what God does with his chosen. He keeps his eyes on you in every trial. The moment he sees his image reflected in your heart, he brings you out purer, stronger, and ready for purpose. The fire also reveals who you truly are. It strips away every mask, every pretense, every illusion of control. In the fire, there is no pretending, there is only truth. When everything else is burned away, you discover what your faith is really made of. You learn that your strength never came from yourself, but from the one who sustains you. That's why chosen people are different. They carry peace in storms and hope in despair, because they've learned that the fire doesn't have the final say. Some people avoid the fire by compromising their faith, but the chosen would rather walk with God in the fire than live without him in comfort. They know that temporary heat is nothing compared to eternal purpose. They understand that the pain of obedience is lighter than the weight of regret. Every furnace in your life has the potential to reveal God's glory if you refuse to bow to fear. The chosen don't run from the fire, they walk through it with faith, knowing that every step taken in trust is a step closer to transformation. Even Jesus walked through his own fire. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he faced the agony of surrender. The cross was his furnace, and though the pain was unbearable, he endured it because of the joy set before him, the redemption of mankind. If the Son of God himself had to endure fire to fulfill his purpose, how much more must we expect the same? But the same Spirit that strengthened him now strengthens you. The same presence that walked with the Hebrew boys now walks with you. The chosen understand that fire is not meant to destroy what's valuable, only what's temporary. You may lose things in the fire, relationships, comfort, positions. But what you gain is far greater. You gain wisdom, you gain depth, you gain intimacy with God. There's something about pain that softens the heart and sharpens the spirit. It humbles you without breaking you. It teaches you dependence without stripping your dignity. The fire burns away everything unnecessary until your life becomes a living testimony of endurance and grace. The fire also separates the genuine from the imitation. It exposes what cannot last. When you walk through difficulty, some people will distance themselves from you. That's because fire reveals loyalty. Those who remain when everything is burning are the ones ordained to walk into your next chapter. God allows the flames to separate your circle so that when you step into restoration, you are surrounded only by those who can handle your blessing. The beauty of the fire is that it doesn't last forever. There is always an exit, always a moment when God says, enough. But when you emerge, you are not the same. Like the Hebrew boys, you come out without even the smell of smoke. The fire refines but does not define you by the burn. It becomes the place where you learn to worship without walls, to trust without answers, to stand when everything else fell apart. That is the strength of the chosen, to walk through what others fear and come out carrying glory. Many people pray for power, for anointing, for purpose, but they forget that all those things are born in the fire. You cannot have the oil without the pressing, the gold without the furnace, the victory without the battle. The fire is the proving ground where faith graduates from words to reality. It's where you stop talking about trust and start living it. It's where you realize that the presence of pain does not mean the absence of God, but often the proof of his nearness. Sometimes the fire is not external, but internal. It's the silent battle in your heart, the struggle no one sees, the nights you wrestle with fear, doubt, or heartbreak. Those are the hottest fires because they test your soul. Yet even there, God is at work. He refines your thoughts, purifies your motives, and teaches you to rely on his Spirit. He takes what was meant to consume you and turns it into fuel for your calling. The more intense the fire, the brighter your faith will shine. Every chosen soul must pass through seasons where everything feels like it's falling apart. But when you look back, you realize that it wasn't falling apart, it was falling into place. The fire that tried to break you became the very thing that birthed your strength. The moments that felt unbearable became the turning points of transformation. The heat that threatened to consume you became the light that guided you. God never wastes a fire. He uses every flame to forge his likeness in you until your life reflects his power and his love in ways that comfort never could. There are moments in life when God seems silent, when prayers echo back unanswered, and when the waiting stretches longer than your strength can bear. The chosen ones know this season well, the season of divine delay. It's a place between promise and fulfillment, between what God said and what you see. It can feel like a wilderness, dry and endless, but it is in that place where faith is formed and trust is tested. God's silence does not mean his absence. His delay is not his denial. Every moment of waiting is purposeful, woven with the threads of preparation, patience, and divine timing. The chosen must learn that waiting is not wasted when it's in the hands of God. When God delays, he's not withholding, he's developing. There are lessons that cannot be learned in abundance, only in waiting. When God promised Abraham a son, the years that followed were filled with silence and uncertainty. But those years were shaping Abraham into the man who could carry the promise with humility and faith. The same is true for you. God delays not to punish, but to prepare. The blessing requires maturity. The promise demands strength. If he gave it too soon, it could destroy what it was meant to bless. So, he waits until your heart is ready, until your character is steady, until your faith can handle the weight of what he's about to give. In the waiting, God often strips away every crutch and distraction until you have nothing left but him. That's when you discover that he's not just the giver of the promise. He is the promise. Waiting refines your worship. It shifts your prayers from Lord, give me what I want, to Lord, make me who you want. The chosen understand that the waiting room of God is the workshop of transformation. It's where your roots grow deep, your spirit learns endurance, and your heart becomes anchored not in outcomes, but in his character. When Joseph was given dreams of greatness, he didn't step into a palace. He was thrown into a pit, then a prison. The years of delay weren't punishment, they were preparation. God was aligning every event, every betrayal, every disappointment to position him for destiny. Had Joseph not been delayed, he would never have met Pharaoh, never have saved nations, never have fulfilled his calling. The waiting built the wisdom he needed for the throne. The chosen ones must see delays as divine alignment, not abandonment. God doesn't forget what he promises. He perfects it in time. The waiting also tests your motives. When your heart truly belongs to God, you don't chase after blessings. You chase after him. There's a sacred beauty in learning to be content before the answer comes. When you can worship without results, trust without evidence, and love God even when you don't understand his plan, that's when your faith becomes unshakable. The chosen don't just wait for God, they wait with God. They allow his presence to sustain them when his plan is still unfolding. In moments of waiting, the enemy whispers lies, that God has forgotten you, that others are moving ahead while you're being left behind, that the delay means disqualification. But those are the very lies that the waiting is meant to expose. The delay forces you to decide what you truly believe about God. Will you trust his heart when you can't trace his hand? Will you still believe he's working when nothing seems to move? That's where real faith lives, not in the comfort of clarity, but in the courage of uncertainty. There's something sacred about God's timing. He moves when the moment is right, not when you demand it. The sun doesn't rise early just because the earth is impatient. Flowers don't bloom in winter because someone wants them to. Everything under heaven has a time, and when God's time comes, nothing can delay it. The chosen must learn to walk in rhythm with heaven, trusting that every delay is protecting them from what is premature. Sometimes God is preparing the blessing for you, other times he's preparing you for the blessing. When Lazarus was sick, Jesus delayed his visit. By the time he arrived, Lazarus had been dead 4 days. To everyone watching, it looked too late. But Jesus wasn't late. He was waiting for the moment when his glory would be revealed. If he had come earlier, Lazarus would have been healed, but because he came later, Lazarus was resurrected. The delay turned a healing into a miracle. That's how God works. What you think is a delay is often the setup for something greater than you asked for. When God delays, it's because he's planning something that will not only bless you, but reveal his power through you. In the stillness of delay, God teaches you to hear his voice more clearly. When the noise of activity stops, when doors close, and when movement ceases, you begin to discern the whispers of the Spirit. You learn that his presence is enough even without progress. You learn that his hand is at work even when you can't see it. Like a seed buried in the soil, unseen growth is happening beneath the surface. The roots are forming before the fruit appears. Waiting seasons are growing seasons, even when everything looks dormant on the outside. The chosen often walk through long delays because their destiny is significant. The greater the call, the longer the preparation. God will not rush the ones he intends to use deeply. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before leading Israel out of Egypt. David spent years tending sheep before sitting on the throne. Jesus spent 30 years in obscurity before beginning his ministry. The world rushes, but heaven builds slowly. The chosen understand that time in God's hands is never wasted, it's investment. Every day of delay is a deposit into your destiny. Waiting also refines your gratitude. When the promise finally arrives, you cherish it differently because you know what it cost you to wait for it. You appreciate the process that produced it. The chosen ones carry a deeper humility, a quiet strength that only comes from walking through long seasons of silence. They know how to praise in private because they've cried in secret. They understand the value of patience because they've lived through pain. That's why when the promise comes, they don't boast, they bow. They don't take credit, they give glory. Sometimes what you call delay is really God's mercy. He holds you back from things that would have hurt you, relationships that would have broken you, and opportunities that would have distracted you. He withholds not because he's cruel, but because he's kind. The waiting isn't rejection, it's protection. When God delays, it's because he sees what you can't. He knows what lies ahead, and he is aligning every piece of the puzzle so that when it finally fits, it's perfect. Waiting seasons also produce empathy. When you've waited, you understand the pain of others who are waiting. You learn to comfort instead of judge, to encourage instead of envy. You become a vessel of compassion because you know what it's like to wrestle with hope. The chosen become intercessors in their delay, praying not just for their own promises, but for the strength of others still waiting. When the time of fulfillment comes, the waiting will make sense. Every tear, every prayer, every silent night will feel like preparation for that moment. You will see that God was never late. He was always on time. The delay will have done its work, shaping your heart, purifying your faith, and anchoring your soul in His purpose. You'll realize that what you gained in the waiting was just as important as what you were waiting for. When God begins to reunite you with what was lost, it's rarely in the way you expect. His restoration doesn't follow the path of logic, but the rhythm of grace. He takes the pieces scattered across time, the moments buried in pain, the opportunities that seem to have slipped away, and brings them together in divine order. When God restores, He doesn't simply return what was lost. He transforms it, purifies it, and aligns it with His purpose. The chosen understand that reunification is not just about receiving back what was taken, but about being prepared to steward it with new wisdom, humility, and gratitude. There are things God separates for a season so that He can strengthen you before giving them back. Some relationships, dreams, or callings were paused, not canceled. You thought it was over, but it was only resting under God's protection until the time was right. Like Joseph reuniting with his brothers years after betrayal, what was once marked by pain becomes the scene of redemption. The reunion is never just about recovery, it's about revelation. God shows you that everything that happened, every loss, every tear, was leading to this moment of divine convergence, where all things begin to work together for good. When God reunites you with what was lost, He first restores your heart to Him. Before He brings back the external blessings, He brings you back internally, back to faith, back to surrender, back to peace. Many times, we long for the return of people or things, but God's greatest restoration begins within. He heals the bitterness, the fear, the disappointment that the loss created. He fills the spaces left empty by absence. Only then can He trust you with what's coming, because if He gives it back before your heart is healed, the old pain will pollute the new blessing. That's why some seasons of waiting feel so long. He's not just preparing the return, He's preparing you to receive it with purity. There is a divine sequence in restoration. God restores order before He restores overflow. He mends what is broken before He multiplies what is missing. Sometimes before something returns, you'll feel as though everything is being stripped away. That's because He is cleaning the foundation. He's removing the idols, the dependencies, the attachments that clouded your vision. He cannot bless the version of you that broke under the last season. He must raise up the version that learned to trust Him in the dark. The reunion happens when your identity is no longer tied to what you lost, but anchored in who He is. When the Israelites were taken into captivity, it seemed like their story had ended. Jerusalem lay in ruins, and their temple was destroyed. Yet, after 70 years, God stirred the heart of a king named Cyrus to send them back. They returned to rebuild what was broken. It didn't happen overnight. It took faith, endurance, and unity. But the glory that came after was greater than what they had before. God reunited them not just with their land, but with their purpose. He turned exile into elevation, loss into legacy. That's how God works. He uses the same places of pain to write new chapters of grace. Some of the things that return to you after a season of loss will look different. God rarely restores something exactly as it was. The friendship may return with deeper understanding. The opportunity may come back in a new form. The dream may be fulfilled through a different path. The chosen don't resist the change. They recognize it as growth. When God brings it back, it's upgraded. What once hurt you will now bless you. What once weakened you will now strengthen you. What once broke you will now build you. The difference is not in what you get back, but in who you've become since it was taken. Reunification also brings revelation. You start to see the hidden hand of God in all the years that didn't make sense. You understand why certain doors had to close, why certain people had to leave, and why certain seasons had to end. You realize that if it hadn't been for those losses, you wouldn't have discovered the depth of His faithfulness. You wouldn't have learned how to depend on Him when everything else failed. The chosen look back and see that what they called loss was actually preservation. God was never taking from them, He was preparing them. There are moments when God reunites you not with a person or possession, but with your own purpose. Somewhere along the way, through pain and disappointment, you might have forgotten who you are, the fire you carried, the calling that once stirred your soul. But when the appointed time comes, God reignites that flame. He awakens what was dormant. He reconnects you to the vision that was buried under fear or failure. He reminds you that His gifts are without repentance, that what He placed in you has not expired, even if it's been delayed. The chosen find themselves returning to their assignment with renewed passion, understanding that nothing truly lost in God's plan ever disappears. It's simply waiting for resurrection. When God reunites, He does so through peace. You won't have to chase what's meant for you. You won't have to manipulate it or fight to make it stay. The things and people that are divinely appointed will flow back into your life with a grace that feels effortless. The same hand that allowed them to leave is the hand that brings them back. That's how you know it's Him. There's no striving, no confusion, no fear. His reunions come with stillness, not struggle. They carry the fragrance of divine timing. Reuniting with what was lost often comes after surrender. When you finally let go of trying to control outcomes, when you release the need to understand everything, that's when God begins to move. He waits until your hands are empty so He can fill them His way. Many people never experience true restoration because they're still clinging to the old version of what they lost. But the chosen release it to God and trust Him to return it better. They understand that surrender is not giving up, it's giving over. It's saying, God, you know how to rebuild this better than I ever could. Sometimes the reunification doesn't mean getting something back physically, but spiritually. Maybe the person you loved is gone or the opportunity has passed, but God reunites you with peace, closure, and acceptance. He gives you understanding that frees your heart. He shows you that the loss wasn't wasted. It matured you, taught you compassion, deepened your faith. The chosen see that even if what was lost never returns, they are still whole because God Himself has filled the space it left. That is the deepest form of restoration. When your soul is no longer haunted by what was, because it's resting in what is. God's reunification always leads to rejoicing. When the prodigal son came home, the father didn't bring up his mistakes. He celebrated his return. That's what heaven does when something or someone comes back into alignment with divine purpose. There's music in the spirit, joy that can't be contained, peace that passes understanding. The reunion is not just about recovery, but redemption. It's the moment when everything that was lost becomes a story of love's triumph. When God reunites you with what was lost, it's not just a personal blessing, it's a testimony for others. People will see your story and realize that God still restores, still heals, still brings back what was broken. Your life becomes a living witness of His mercy. What you thought was over becomes the evidence that God never stops working behind the scenes. The chosen become carriers of hope, reminding others that what feels gone is never beyond the reach of His hand. There will come a time when all the years of loss and waiting will make sense. The scattered pieces will fit together in a pattern so perfect that you'll see how every delay, every heartbreak, every detour was leading you here. God's reunification isn't random, it's revelation. He brings everything full circle, turning endings into beginnings, ashes into beauty, and sorrow into song. The chosen ones learn that nothing truly lost in God's kingdom stays lost forever. Everything surrendered to Him finds its way back, renewed and reborn, in His perfect time and in His perfect way.